Hello, I'm Sinner, and today I want to talk about something that has been on my mind for a long time actually, but I just really haven't had the time to talk about it. And it's something that sort of interests me, I guess, or I find funny. And it's this thing with the topic of being transgender. You see, um, if and more so less about like actually being transgender, but more about like the ideas surrounding it. You see, like obviously one big question is around this debate, you could say is like, what does it mean? What does gender mean, right? Is gender a social construct or is gender a biological thing? Blah, 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 blah. And that's where the debate's at, right? And obviously the position of someone on the left or someone who's pro transgender is that sex is like the biological reality, and then gender is the socially constructed reality. And one thing you'll notice, however, is there's two definitions that are always given that are different definitions for gender. The first is that gender is a social construct based around societal norms and expectations. And if that is the correct definition, then, by the way, it's indistinguishable from gender norms. And therefore, you won't be able to choose your gender. So I don't really like that definition. And then the other, or I don't think it's a good definition, rather. And then the other definition is that gender is actually more or less whatever you want it to be, right? It's sort of a self-made construct. And therefore, you can choose your own gender, so to speak, right? Or if you feel a certain gender, you are that gender. And the thing is, that's probably a more practically applicable definition, right? Because when you see how people who are pro transgender use the idea of gender, it's more along those lines where it's like, okay, I feel this certain way, I believe I am this way. I don't care what society thinks. I'm just going to act out this particular lifestyle, do these particular things in accordance with this identity I have. Right? That's the mindset. But one of the things that sort of puzzles me is when you look at it, that second definition, which I think is the more accurate, applicable one, where it's it's the self-made reality, has this weird thing with it, which is that for whatever reason, it's only applied to one human characteristic, right? Now, sex is a biological reality, right? You have a biological apparatus. Every human has a biological apparatus that's directed either towards male sexual reproduction or female sexual reproduction. Now, obviously, not all of them are functioning. Not every man can produce sperm or produce viable um, sperm. Not every woman can produce viable eggs or is fertile. But what makes you, and not everyone has, like, you can get your pee cut off and that sort of thing. But what it is holistically, is your body directed towards what type of sexual reproduction, broadly speaking? And that's how I would say is like that's how I would define gender. Um, that's the or sex. Sorry, that's how I would define sex. And I personally believe sex and gender are the same thing, just different terms. I don't believe in the transgender view. Um, but what I was getting at is it's a biological sex, even if you're pro transgender, is a biological reality. So, really, when you think about it, gender is just the abstraction of the concept of sex so that it can become a socially constructed or mentally constructed sort of fiction. And I don't mean that in like the bad way. I mean that in like the money way. Money is a social construct based around a collective view of value, right? So things do have value, right? Now, necessarily, is it true that, say, a US dollar bill that's backed by nothing is actually represents the value of this particular, I don't know, lolly, candy bar, as Americans would say? Um, Not necessarily, because money is fictitious, right? Money is a social construct. But obviously, the value, like things having value, is objectively real. So long as people have needs and wants, things will have a value relative to humanity's needs and wants. So when I say, anyway, getting back to the point, so I'm not too far off topic, with gender is the abstraction of sex made into a fiction that you can then play around with, change up, you know, adjust, right? So you can choose your gender, but you can't choose your sex. You can change your gender, you can't change your sex. These sorts of things. You can live out multiple different realities. My question is, why stop at sex? To me, it doesn't seem self-evident that the human characteristic of sex need be the only thing that's stopped at, right? Um, why not stop at other biological or physical realities about humans? Um, why not say, for example, yeah, well, age is a social construct. Age is a real thing. Chronological age is a real thing. However, from now on, we're all going to say that maturity is a social construct, and maturity is relative. And someone might have the chronological age of, say, 30, but the maturity of a 20-year-old. It seems fairly reasonable, maybe even more reasonable to say than, in my opinion, than like sex and gender. But what wouldn't be reasonable, obviously, is the conclusion, right? Which is that, therefore, we should treat someone based off their maturity and not based off of their actual chronological age. Now, obviously, to a limited extent, you should, right? If someone's immature for their age, you shouldn't maybe trust them with certain responsibilities unless you're willing to risk, you know, them messing up. But as a society, you wouldn't say treat a 50-year-old, no matter how immature he may be, with the moral associations of a, I don't know, 10-year-old, right? You know, if someone, even if a 50-year-old had the mental age, the legitimate mental age of a 10-year-old, no one reasonably would be okay with that 50-year-old dating their 10-year-old child, obviously. But to get back to it, the point I'm thinking about is, why not, as someone who's pro transgender, sort of like go all the way with these sorts of things? Like, say, make it so like age, chronological age versus maturity, gender, or sex versus gender. Why not make it like your biological race versus your socially determined race? So yeah, maybe you are genetically, you might have the genetic ancestry of a Caucasian, but because you grew up in the hood, you're actually, black, and you can say the N-word now. Or like, even like species, I think this is actually something that I was thinking about, and I was going to mention it, so I'm going to mention it now. With this thing, I think furries are actually the forerunner. Furries are the forerunner of what's to come with gender theory, right? Because if gender is an abstraction of sex, then what furries are doing is the next step. I've seen furries on the internet claim that they identify as a fox, or they identify as a dog, or they identify as the animal that's their persona. And people look at this and go, this is crazy, this is nonsense. You know, you can't identify as a frog. That's so dumb. But it's really, when you think about it, it's just applying the same logic that's applied to sex and gender to your own species. Why can't you, if gender is a social construct, why can't you abstract species and say, well, you know, I think human race, what makes someone human is sort of like a vague term. It's a social construct. I identify as a frog. I feel like a frog. Therefore, I am a frog. Now, biologically, I'm a human, but I identify as a frog because that's just my identity. Blah, 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 blah. I think, why not? Like, one of the things I would love to see, as silly as it sounds, is like the same people who are pro transgender being pro like maturity being a social construct, like age being a social construct, that sort of thing, race being a social construct. Why not even make height a social construct, right? Like your measurements. When you think about it, some French guy came up with the metric system. So I'm not actually like 180 something centimeters tall. I'm not 184 centimeters tall, really, when you think about it, because that measurement is a social construct. Rather, I'm something else. I'm, you know, a gajillion meters tall or a gajillion centimeters tall. I'm the tallest guy there is because height is relative or whatever, you know? Why not play with the idea? Why not take the idea to its logical conclusions and, as silly as it sounds, have fun with it? Like, it seems kind of boring and limited that it's only about gender. Like, why not make, I mean, things like race are genuinely a spectrum. Gender, I don't know about that, but like race is totally a spectrum. So like there's so much room, so many places to go with these sorts of presuppositions, yet it seems that people don't do it. Like the a lot of people who are pro transgender aren't going to be pro transracial or pro, you know, like anti chronological age. You know, they might on a limited level believe like, okay, well, we should treat someone according to their maturity, not their chronological age. But they're obviously not going to support legislation where you can say, I feel like a teenager, so I deserve to go back to high school. And the government has to support it. You know, you get what I mean? Like, I think it would be so much more fun, so much more interesting if these sorts of like conclusions had been reached rather than it just be about sex and gender. I think if it were everything, it would be so much better. And again, that's why I think furries are so ahead of the curve on this. They're the pioneers of what's to come. Because furries were like, well, if identity is like this abstract concept that people can change, sure, I'm going to say that I'm a frog. I'm going to say that I'm a fox. I'm going to have a weird persona, and I'm going to have my parents refer to my new pronouns as, you know, frog and frog self or whatever. I'm saying frog because I saw this meme. I'll try and like add it in. It's not a meme, sorry, a video where this like left wing guy is like saying like he's conservative now because he saw TikTok about frog pronouns, and I thought it was funny. But yeah, I think yeah, that's really all I have to say. I think people should take this stuff to its logical conclusion because it would be way more fun and interesting, even though I disagree with it, to see the conclusions they come to and the arguments they offer rather than do all this drab and dry stuff about only one characteristic of the human condition or what it means to be human. Do it with every characteristic of humanity and your identity. And then you can open the doors so much. Now, obviously, it's going to make it harder to argue. I think, you know, the moral arguments that you can make are sort of tricky, but why not? Just do it. Like have fun with it. Um, I think it's better for you to look at it for what it is and take it to its logical conclusion than play this game where you sort of go like, well, these things, age and sex and gender are sort of their own thing, and then, but I disagree with the idea of being transracial or trans species or age being a social construct or whatever it is. Like, just go the whole way, man. Go the whole way. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. I don't know how well this is going to be received, but I've decided I'm just going to like add some gameplay, probably chess gameplay to this video, so it's not just a photo of that painting, the Ballad of Lenore painting. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm Sinner. Please subscribe. Bye-bye.
You how to use frogs, pronouns, and sentences, so let's go.
Yeah, that's it. I'm Republican now. You win. I'm done. I can't do it, right? I'm accepting, tolerant, inclusive, right? Whatever gender you want to identify as, binary, non-binary, but not going to call people frogs. We draw the line at amphibians, right? You can't identify as a frog because you're not a frog, right? You know that, though, right? You weren't cursed by a witch in a Disney movie, right? You don't hop lily pad to lily pad, right? So to call you frogs or frog self would be a little ridiculous, right? So, yeah, I'm a Republican now. MAGA, stop the steal.